I am Ian Dilly, and this is Ian and Friends. I'm here with
Michael Sheehan.
Thank you for being here.
You're quite welcome.
And this is the Giro d'Italia Spectacular. We're going to be talking all things Giro d'Italia, which starts on Friday, May 4th, live on FloBikes, of course. So, Michael, the Tour de France is the #1 biggest bike race in the world. The Giro is the second. I heard you were just at the third biggest bike race in the world, the Red Hook Criterium.
Yeah.
How did that go?
It was rough. It was a good time. Some people had a little crash. But, yeah, unlike those long races, it was only a 40-minute race, which...
Michael...
It lasted me like 20 minutes.
Michael has been hobbling around.
I apologize. I'm a mess right now. I'm missing literally the whole right side of my body, so I'm going to hang tough for you guys, our millions of fans. I know you expect a lot.
Yeah, you dug deep to be here.
Yeah, I am continuing to do so.
So thank you. We've got an exciting show today. We're going to start out looking at the big start in Jerusalem, Israel. The Giro d'Italia is starting outside of Europe for the first time in its history.
First time a Grand Tour has ever started outside of Europe, right?
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah. So, we've been talking to some of the top North Americans that are doing the Giro d'Italia all week long. We'll have their Skype interviews up on the site, but we wanted to play a few clips here sort of getting their thoughts and what they thought about the race starting in Jerusalem. One thing that surprised me, speaking to pro bike racers over beers or in informal settings, you sort of hear them gripe a little bit about some of the logistics involved in these grand tours, but they all seem pretty excited about going to Jerusalem and taking in the experience there.
Yeah, Michael Woods had an interesting take, which I really like, and kind of it resonates with me about it just being a whole big adventure.
Yeah, let's roll that clip here.
When you're racing, because you're so focused on a position, but what we're doing too is also like just a crazy adventure. Like it's like guys pay so much money to go and ride all the climbs in the Dolomites. Like they'll do these out route tours or whatever, and I get like paid to do this, and I get like the best service, closed roads. It's amazing. So I get to go on these adventures, and that's kind of the way I look at it in a lot of ways. I get to go on these really cool life experiences, and going to Israel is going to be one of those life experiences that I'm excited for. I've never been to Israel world because I think this is what the sport needs is to branch out as much as possible and show how international it is and show how it's just this really cool adventure.
Yeah, so I mean he's looking at it not just as like I'm gonna go race my bike in Jerusalem, but he's 3 years into being a professional bike racer, as he calls himself, the oldest neo-pro of all time. I think he joined the World Tour at 29 years old. He's still pretty pumped about doing crazy stuff like starting a Grand Tour in Israel.
Yeah, and that's partly because he is still so new to it. Like, when I started racing, I remember I was with a whole bunch of like older teammates who'd been doing it their whole lives, and I wind up in just a really cool part of the country or part of the world. I'm like, can we just like stay here for a few days and go like hang out? And the old guys who've been everywhere, they're like, no, we're going home. So Woods is definitely still very bright-eyed and stoked to be going to Israel. And I think that a lot of the riders probably are, because there's not really racing in Israel up to this point.
Yeah, and I mean it's refreshing that perspective. I liked where he was talking about the fact that people pay a lot of money to do what he's doing. A lot of these events that have become, really popular, that provide a professional-like experience, hot route and whatever not. Where he's traveling around the world and getting the A+ treatment, and I think there are definitely times where it still feels like a job to him, but it just seemed really down to earth and genuine, and
Yeah, it's still the dream job for Mike Woods, which is great. Like that's cool. There needs to be more bike racers because the longer racers tend to do it, they just get more curmudgeonly and jaded. So and there are a lot of logistics that go into it, and honestly, the riders only see like a very, very small amount. I think Joe Dombrowski told us a little bit about what the logistics of taking the Giro to Israel might look like. Let's run that clip with him.
Yeah, let's look at what Joe
But
said.
I believe it's the first non-European start to a Grand Tour.
Yeah.
And I think they know it's probably pushing the boundaries a bit. So, they want everything to come off really well. And I'd imagine also from what I've heard from security standpoint, it's supposed to be pretty top level stuff. So it'll be interesting just to observe that. And, additionally, like you won't have the mechanic's truck or the team bus or the team cars. So all that stuff will stay, and we'll see that when we get to Italy. I had also heard, additionally, that they can't bring some things like glue, for example, to Israel, I think for security reasons. So, for example, they have to bring enough wheels that if you get a flat tire, they just don't need that wheel because they can't be putting new tires on there. I kind of get the feeling that if it's successful, that you may see more of it. Whether it's from the Giro, Tour of Vuelta. I'm sure you remember there were talks. It must have been 4 or 5 years ago now that the Giro would start in DC.
I was just going to bring that up. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Your hometown.
Yeah, I know. Imagine that I could actually get behind. But
they'd have to go to Warrington to what's the closest mountain? Mount Weather. Finish atop Mount Weather.
Yeah. Or we could do a stage on Skyline Drive.
Yeah.
That would be cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think one of the cool things in talking with Joe was that he was actually super into the logistics behind it. That was only a minute and a half of our conversation, but he kept going on about all the different things. He'd sort of just been grilling the staff about what actually goes into starting a Grand Tour in Israel, from the fact that he didn't mention it there, but they don't have their own chefs, which is sort of a big deal for them, especially a team like EF, which is sort of known for having a big focus on their diet and their anti-inflammatory diet and whatnot. And so the chefs and the food is all being provided by the race. So it's no glue,
Yeah, it's funny. And these big transfers, when you have to, during a Grand Tour, you have to get up and go from one town to another. It's, of course, way bigger going from one country to another. And the riders, all they really have to do, it's a pain. You have to go finish your stage, and then you have to sit in a bus or you have to get on an airplane. That's not fun for the riders. But what the staff is having to do is they're having to disassemble all the bikes, put it into bike bags. They have no very, very limited infrastructure at these races. A big reason why World Tours in Europe is because that's where all these teams are based. They have an entire service course there that is really not a far drive away from anywhere else that they are, and they have their buses, they have their trucks. None of that is going to be in Israel, and that's going to be a really big challenge. EF is apparently going to have to take pre-glued tubular wheel sets enough for 3 stages in Israel.
Right.
If
8 guys times
8
3
guys
stages,
times okay, what if you, worst case scenario, everyone flats one day? That is a lot. That's a lot to do. And you brought up the point, with a Grand Tour starting outside of Europe, is this a sign that the World Tour is going to become more international and be more like a Formula One race? And right now, cycling just doesn't have the money to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We're seeing a push more and more to globalize the sport. Early season races in the Middle East and end of season races in Asia. What that's going to take for this to happen in the middle of the season for some of these entrenched events in Europe. Not necessarily the monuments, but still World Tour events, but maybe smaller World Tour events like the Tour of Poland. It's money. we saw that Israel reportedly ponied up $12 million to get the start over there. And a lot of that money is going back to the teams to help out with the infrastructure and the logistics in terms of, shuttling 8 riders and, probably 3 times as many of that in staff and vehicles and whatever else over there. So,
yeah, so if you pony up that money, the teams are like, okay, we'll go to China, we'll go to Israel, whatever, but they don't have the capital to just go out and do that for themselves. It's funny, in Tour California, just seeing it in America, you have all the World Tour teams showing up, and all of Quick Step is like crammed into a little tiny rental RV thing, driving from one California city to the other. BMC and Cannondale, they have their team buses here because they're American teams, and other than that, it's tough. They don't have the comforts of home that you have in Europe.
Yeah, it's kind of nice. It's like when these teams are sort of stretching to, travel from Europe to go race in California or go to Israel. It's almost like they're back to the roots in terms of like bike bumming and doing whatever it takes just to get the job done. I mean, obviously when they show up to the start line, they look very professional and pro and everything. But I like that imagery of like, no, we can't afford another rental vehicle. Like everybody's riding in this car.
Yeah.
So we talked to Ben King as well, and Ben is interesting. He had an interesting take because he's pretty open about his faith. He's devoutly Christian, and so for him going to Jerusalem, starting the Giro there, is a little bit of a religious experience. I mean, he said, this is where a lot of the Bible stories are from. And, one thing that was really interesting that he mentioned was one of his heroes, one of Italy's greatest cyclists, Gino Bartoli, is widely known and revered for helping, Jewish residents in Italy during the Second World War and almost acting as a covert agent to, shuttle them documents so they could escape the country on his training rides. So Ben spoke to that a little bit. Let's go ahead and play his interview and see what he had to say about the start in Israel.
Talked about the unifying aspect of the race, but I think the sport in and of itself is it crosses so many boundaries and it unites so many different types of people. And obviously on our team we have Christians and Muslims and people of all different faiths and backgrounds, and in the sport it's the same. The cycling is one thing that kind of everyone can relate to. It crosses so many different boundaries of race, ethnicity, and religion and culture. I've made really close friendships with people in the sport that I probably would never have had the chance to get to know in the same way. Gino was able to smuggle documents around the country to Jews who were hiding out. So he brought fake IDs to all these people around the country by packing them in his seat tube and riding right past all the carabinieri and just played it off as his training routes. When they got suspicious of one route that he was doing very often, he just changed his route up and would take his documents to other places. So he, is a true hero and a multi-time Grand Tour winner. So someone that I really look up to, and so I think this Giro is cool. It kind of connects a little bit more with that story.
Yeah. So I like how for Ben it's a cultural experience, and he's looking forward to sort of soaking in the different elements of the history of Jerusalem and sort of what it means to him and his own context of his faith and religion.
Yeah, and I think we're really just gearing up for a really unique experience in professional cycling. It's never happened before, and there's so much history over there. And, all 3 of those riders, they all seem excited about going and experiencing it. And I'm looking forward to seeing how it plays on television. Well.
Yeah, and I don't think we can also discount the fact that there has been some controversy surrounding the start, and concerns about protests or potential violence, and so I think there's a sense of tentativeness amongst the riders as well, and this is the big start. Like, I hope this goes well. Can they really pull this off? Type thing.
Yeah, it's risky, I'd say, but there's only so much you can plan for, and all the riders they're just planning for the race, and I think it's going to be a good show.
Yeah. I mean, it's on Friday. We'll find out. Let's talk about what we're gonna see. I mean, the prologue kicks off the start, 9.7 kilometer time trial. We have a fly through here that we can play. It starts right kind of at the gates of the old city, and it's a lumpy course, relatively technical, very urban, and then a stiff sort of 300-meter kicker climb at the end. It's like 10% gradient. So what are your thoughts on what riders are going to excel on this course, who we can expect to, take the Maglia Rosa off the bat?
I think that this TT, it is just long enough to be telling and somewhat decisive for this first week of racing. 10K is pushing the limits of like a proper prologue. We can see 30-second gaps opening up among some of the favorites if, some of the guys who aren't really the time trial GC riders at the Giro don't show up with really good legs. They're going to lose. They're going to be in a deficit from day one. So I think that it's going to be Dumoulin and Rowan Dennis is going to be the really interesting battle. On stage one, Froome, of course, also puts in a really good TT. I wouldn't want to be surprised to not see him take the pink jersey after the first stage. I think it's going to be a little bit more favoring a Dennis and Dumoulin type.
Yeah, it seems like Froome is always there in the prologue, but never quite. And maybe it's just because he's not willing to take the risks in the corners or whatnot, but he'll be like 6 seconds down, like fourth place or something like that.
And I think that's fine. And honestly, there may be some strategy in the Team Sky camp around that. If he knows that he's going to be right there within a few seconds, it might even play to his advantage to not take the pink jersey so early, because whatever team is riding the first couple days, because after that it's just sprint stages. So realistically, the best time trialist is going to hold on to the pink jersey for a few days. And that is taking some firepower out of the legs of his teammates from day one. And Froome probably isn't going to want to ask Team Sky to control the race for the first week of racing up to Mount Etna, essentially.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we have 2 almost pancake flat days in Israel following the prologue, and then 2 sort of lumpy days in Sicily after there's a rest day on Monday, and then they go back to the island of Sicily to start the Giro in Italy, and
that rest day is not going to be very restful. I feel like I should just throw that in back to like the logistics that we were talking about, because they are going to have to pack up their entire camp and then actually go to Europe and sync up with the team's infrastructure in Europe. So those, not much of a rest day.
Right. And the Giro isn't known for, having relatively kind of luxurious logistics in terms of transfers and other things like that. Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful race, but the organizers sort of seem to go out of their way to make it iconic and grand. And if that means the riders need to do like a 6+ hour transfer, that's what they're going to need to do to get where they need to go to ride the cool roads. So yeah, it's a taxing race all around, and I think you're totally right that those rest days are rest days, in air quotes.
Rest days for the viewers. Don't have anything to watch.
Yeah, we can catch our breaths. Yeah, and then kind of when we get back to, we have the prologue, then we're back in Sicily. About a week from now, next Wednesday, is when the GC fireworks are really going to begin in earnest. We have the first mountaintop finish on Mount Etna. It's this massive volcano. It last erupted in 2015.
Really?
There was lava flowing down the banks of Mount Etna.
Yeah, and this is a never-before-used side of Mount Etna in the Giro as well, so totally new road for the riders to experience. Nobody really has any past races going up it.
Yeah, and in the previous stages on Mount Etna, they've sort of taken the main highway to the top, a relatively gradual gradient, a pretty wide open road, and it would get windswept. There would be pack dynamics, a lot of drafting, and I don't think it sort of produced the fireworks that they were looking for. You did a nice write-up on what we can expect out of this stage, and it's like you said, it's a never before used route. And if you look at the actual map, they're kind of taking like alleyways and little side roads up to the top. So it's going to be not only, steeper and more challenging, but also quite technical.
It's going to be a really, really big day in the first week of racing. It's pretty much 30 kilometers for the uphill at the finish. There's technically the Mount Etna climb is the final 10K of the race, but 30K out, it's just uphill the entire way. There's a little bit of a descent breaking up that first chunk from the final push. And it is going to be really, really depleted fields, I think. Like you said, technical approach, lots of uphill leading into the actual climb. The field's going to be depleted, and it's going to be interesting to see just what teams have, enough riders to control and protect their leader in those last, 10K even.
Yeah, and then following that, we have a lot of sort of mid-category mountain stages, and then it's really in the second half of the race that we're gonna see huge time gaps. The sort of drama that the Giro is known for.
Mm-hmm.
What do we have to look forward to coming into the end of the race?
I am personally really looking forward to stage 14, 15, and 16. Because that whole run-in into the stage 16 time trial is going to be pretty wild and unpredictable. Stage 14 finishes on Mount Zoncolan, which is a really, really historic just climb that's used in the Giro pretty frequently.
Yeah, I mean, it's considered by a lot of people the hardest climb in the world. It's sort of like there's a raging debate amongst bike nerds about what climb is harder.
Tell us about it, Ian.
Yeah. I only know what I hear from people that have actually ridden these climbs, it's dynamic enough that Mike Woods the day after Liège went and reconned the Zoncolan.
Yeah.
Obviously that's one he has sort of circled in his race Bible. He likes the steep pitches, but yeah, it's going to be an iconic day for sure.
So the Zoncolan's the finish of stage 14. Then 15 is I think it's going to be a really hard, unpredictable stage. People haven't talked about it too much because it isn't an actual mountaintop finish, but there are 4 categorized climbs, and then that final 10K is uphill. It isn't a categorized climb. There are no KOM points at the line, but this is a stage that to me looks like it's uphill for the first, I don't know what that was, 50K or so. It's going to be a really hard start. You could see a threatening break go, and then there are just lots of opportunities throughout that entire stage for guys to slip away, and it could be kind of a crucial day on GC in an unpredictable way.
I feel like this is a day, if Alberto Contador were still racing, where you would expect some hijinks from him, sitting in 8th place and then attacks on the first climb. Everybody sort of has their playbook about how the race is going to shake out, and all of a sudden everything gets turned upside down.
Yeah, and only adding to the intrigue of that day, it's followed by a rest day, so climbers may be going into it thinking that they could burn the house down a little bit and then just recover the next day. And that is their opportunity to build up a bit of a buffer if they're not as strong time trialists. So stage 15, super unpredictable. Then you have a rest day. Then you go into the 34-kilometer time trial of the Giro, which is really playing into the hands of Froome and Dumoulin.
Yeah, I think especially those climbers probably not having a ton of confidence going into that time trial, which is a relatively straightforward time trial. That's going to be a really anxious rest day for them.
So if you're Fabio Aru, if you're Domenico Pozzovivo, Thibaut Pinot, you are going to be sending it on stage 15 because you need, at the very least, a 30-second buffer over Froome and Dumoulin, and probably way more.
Yeah, I would think, for someone like Aru, maybe 2 minutes.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, like how much time did Quintana have, you know, going into the last stage of the 2017 Giro last year? You know, 2 minutes. I mean, it wouldn't be surprising to see Dumoulin put a minute or more into who was ever in second place.
Yeah.
So if you're a climber and you're hoping to place within the top 20 or something, you could be in big trouble. What are some of the just like mental dynamics that plays in terms of having a rest day right before the time trial? I mean, what are these guys doing during that rest day? Are they actually getting to rest? Are they doing, you know, some openers, some efforts? How much are they riding?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think that's going to be a really, really big challenge for a lot of these riders, because when you're just day in, day out, going out and racing, you know, 150 to 200 kilometers, you kind of know what you're going to expect out of your legs. They might feel a little bit heavy at the start, but then you like get going and, you know, it's just another day in the saddle. When you have a hard day like stage 15 going into a rest day, you're going to have to really, really know your body and trust what your body wants. So a lot of these riders, they're probably going to be putting in some like decent miles on that rest day, I would think, and getting some intensity, because if you just, like I said, a rest day isn't a rest day. If you just go and kick your feet up on the couch, your legs are going to feel terrible in 2 days. So they're going to really be spinning aggressively, and I think that some guys may overdo it and underdo it on that rest day going into the time trial. So that's where a guy like Froome, who has, you know, Team Sky, who's obviously just dialed and this stuff, he's going to be fine. I'm expecting a really good time trial from him, but if some of these guys are not good time trialists and they're already in their head stressing out about how to approach that stage 16, that rest day is going to throw just another layer of complexity in it. And
you know who's going to have a tough day?
Who?
Pinot.
Yeah.
Like, talk about somebody that is probably in his head way too much, and like, you know, he can time trial, you know, he can climb, but him showing up with his best legs to that TT following a rest day, I wouldn't put any money on that.
Yeah, he's so good at going uphill. He's so good, but yeah, it's going to be an interesting test for the GC. And then, you know, after that, chips fall where they may. It is stage 19 and 20.
Yeah, I know you're looking forward to these. A gravel racer such as yourself.
Yes. Yeah, Grodes in stage 19. This is actually, stage 19 hits the highest point of the Giro d'Italia. There's a whole separate award for just whichever rider gets over the Passo della Finstra first. That's the highest altitude. And
yeah,
the
last...
Cimacopi. Yeah, thank you. The I knew Italian person some. Anyways, yeah. So halfway up, the pavement just deteriorates into gravel, and it's going to blow up. The last time that they did that climb, it finished on top. Now it's in the middle of the stage. Field is going to completely splinter. I have no idea what it's going to look like after the descent there. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how the climbers can fare on the Grodes.
Yeah, no, that's going to be an amazing day. It'll be interesting to see if they do anything different equipment-wise, like run a little bit thicker, heavier tire. You know, and it's kind of like Strada Bianchi thrown into the middle of the Giro d'Italia. It'll be exciting.
Yeah, that's like kind of the stage that I have circled. I'm just really pumped to see that. It's going to be great crowds on the side of the road too. And then stage 20, another really big climbing day. And then after that, the Giro's kind of doing a Champs-Élysées type finish in Rome for sprinters. So 19 and 20, if climbers are in a deficit after that time trial, this is their only opportunity to win the race. And yeah, it might blow up.
Yeah, and we saw last year, you know, the race really played right into Dumoulin's hands because it ended with a time trial. And so I think that was sort of a carrot for him to hang on and stay as close as he could on the climbs in those final closing days. And even at the end of the race last year, a lot of those stages, they would summon a climb, but then there'd be a certain amount of flat road over the top where he could claw back a little bit of time. So with these mountaintop and summit finishes coming right at the end of the race, yeah, it is sort of the last hurrah for the climbers to really take their shots, and it's a little bit like when Nibali won, and I think 2 years ago, and just everybody was falling apart, and it took back like 2 minutes in the last two stages.
Yeah, it's gonna be a pretty unpredictable race. The riders were also excited about that, who you talked to, right? There's a lot of guys thinking that it's gonna be pretty open.
Yeah, all the North Americans were pumped. I mean, they're looking at the route, and they don't feel like there's any one team strong enough to really control the race. I mean, I know.
Which I kind of disagree with, as a casual observer.
Relatively strong team.
They have an amazing team. Are you kidding me? I think that Sergio Henao is going to put his hand up and be the next super lieutenant for Chris Froome at this race.
Yeah, I mean, or Wout Poels. I mean, I know he hasn't had the most stellar year so far. I think he's battled some injury, but I mean, the guy won a monument. He won Liège, and he's always been one of the last guys there at the Tour in terms of being beside Froome on the final climb. So
and Kenny Elissonde.
Yeah, I know you pegged Kenny Elissonde.
Who was just incredible. I had no idea who he was until the Tour of the Alps, and then he was like the guy basically accidentally attacking Froome, even though he's his teammate, just because he was so strong on all those climbs. So not to disagree with all our American World Tour riders, but I think that Sky is the team to beat here. They are showing up with their A game. But yeah, in general, there isn't a super team.
Yeah, well, I mean, the other thing about Sky too is there's always a certain amount of bad luck that befalls them at the Giro, right? I think the way the Giro is set up with the more technical courses and it's not sort of the wide roads and the more formulaic parkour that you see at the Tour, where I'm sure Sky shows up with a script, a playbook, a strategy, and they execute it. Maybe their Achilles heel at the Giro is that it's a race that you can't script that much. And I think that's the thing that guys like, Ben King especially, he doesn't excel at one thing in particular, but, he's just a phenomenal rider. I mean, the kid won U.S. Pro road race when he was like 20 years old from a breakaway that went off the line. So he's looking at some of these stages and being on a team where he'll probably have some opportunity depending on how Louis Mentis does.
If you can slip into a breakaway and you're good at that, this is going to be a great Giro.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of opportunities for breakaways that can make it to the finish line.
Yeah, and Dombrowski was right there. And the interesting thing about Woods was he was saying that he would be looking for the breakaway to come back before the final climb if he was going to win a stage. So sort of tipping his hat that, he would obviously love to win a stage, but he'll also be riding for GC as well.
Yeah, I'm so excited to see his result at Liège because he was going to be one of my picks for a top 10 finish at the Giro, and then he got sick at the beginning of the year, didn't really have the season, and it seems like he has the legs back from last year's Giro when he was right there with the favorites on pretty much every finishing climb. So he's going to put out a big ride, I think.
Yeah, and you were, mentioning BMC. They're bringing Rohan Dennis, who is an aspiring Grand Tour racer. We didn't really see him display Grand Tour racer kind of form at Romandy, but they're also bringing Roche. What are your thoughts on their odds and them making an impact on this Giro?
Man, if I was BMC, I'd be a little bit nervous. Nico Roche is someone I'm always so excited about in the races, but he's kind of like a TJ Van Garderen, where he's always just right there, and then it just doesn't quite work out for the overall GC. So I think it's going to come down to Dennis, and he is super unproven. And for a massive team like BMC to be going in with, not too many tried and true options is interesting, especially because there's all this they don't know if they're going to have funding to go on after 2019, and it seems like their business plan right now is just all weight on Port for the Tour de France.
Yeah, and I mean, Porta is someone who's unproven as well. I mean, the guy's always a favorite coming into these Grand Tours, but he's never been on the podium at a Grand Tour. So obviously a phenomenal rider, but There's a lot of pressure on that team, essentially, and it'll be interesting to see if they rise to meet that pressure or if it has an effect on their performance.
Yeah, time will tell there. Hopefully there's not a Kickstarter at the end of at the end of the Giro. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and then let's talk about Chad Haga. He's another American. He writes for us on FloBikes. He's spent some time here in Austin. He is gonna have quite the Giro. Working as Dumoulin's right-hand man. They're not bringing a huge contingent of climbers to this race. So in those valleys, on those flats, guys like Haga, Kirenka and Sky, they're really going to have their work cut out for them. They're going to see a lot of time in the wind.
I'm so pumped to see what Chad does. He's one of those riders who has gone against the grain as far as traditional making it to the World Tour ranks goes. He raced in college and, with no help from like U23 development programs or anything, just made his way up to the World Tour the hard way, and he's kind of proving, just like Mike Woods and other riders, that you don't have to be a just 19-year-old phenomenal athlete to be successful in Europe, because every year we are seeing him just get stronger and stronger, and I think that last year's Giro was a really big step for him because he was defending the pink jersey for most of the race, and I think that, like I said, he's just getting stronger, and he's going to have a lot of responsibility on his shoulders, and I think that he's going to do it proud.
And this is the first year, too, that he's really been able to prepare and plan for a Grand Tour, a big race like this, have a main goal that he's building his season around. In the past, he would joke that he was the only rider that did the Romandy, Giro d'Italia, Dauphine sweep. 3 of the more demanding stage races all back to back to back. Not many guys are doing a week-long World Tour stage race in front of a Grand Tour and the week after. So it'll be interesting to see him coming in with the ability to really prepare to plan his spring around performing at this event. If he can be that sort of super domestique.
Yeah. He's a Texan, so I think he's got it.
Yeah. I mean, we'll probably dedicate hours and hours to him over the course of the Giro just because he is a fellow Texan.
not that we're biased or anything.
Cool. And then, in summary, let's talk about some of the dark horses. We've mentioned Froome and Dumoulin a lot, but there's a lot of racers that are going to be challenging them. We've got Miguel Angel Lopez, we've got Thibaut Pinot, Bennett, Woods, Mentees. I'm probably missing some guys. It's going to be hard for them to control all those GC guys, especially with the amount of climbing, the challenging stages, the sort of unpredictable nature of this race.
Yeah, I am pumped to see George Bennett at this race. I was going crazy for him at the Giro d'Italia, the Tour de France last year. He won Tour of California, went to the Tour, just found himself in the top 10. Unfortunately had to withdraw because he got the flu. But I think that he is just a future GC star in Grand Tours, and this is his kind of chance for redemption after the Tour de France last year. So he will be a serious dark horse for the whole 3 weeks. Thibaut Pinot, obviously on flying form. We know he can climb well. Don't know about the descending and the time trialing stuff. There are always a lot of variables that have to go right for Thibaut Pinot in a bike race.
Let's not forget he was at the podium at the Tour de France, though.
He was, yeah. a valid point, yeah. Yeah, so we'll see. If he shows up with the same form that he had in the last few weeks and is able to carry it through the entire Giro, he's going to be a serious threat. Astana, they have Miguel Angel Lopez and pretty much half their team.
They're having quite the magical season.
Yeah, they've won literally everything, and no one can forget like 2015 when they just rode like mopeds the entire second half of the race. I think that we're going to see a bit of that again. They are very, very strong right now. They have Luis Leon Sanchez, who is going to animate things. I don't know. Pello Bilbao, Jan Hurt, those two guys were amazing at Tour of the Alps. Tanel Kangert, always good. Alexi, it goes on. Right. Yeah. Astana's going to be an interesting, dangerous team to watch.
Yeah. And I mean, there's going to be, stories and stars that that rise during the race. I mean, we saw Ben O'Connor from Didata, have a phenomenal Tour of the Alps, so he's going to be one to watch. We can't forget about the sprints. How many stages can Viviani win, and how many times will we get to see him cry if he loses?
A good question. I think that it's interesting. There are 8 sprint stages.
Yeah.
I think this year, and Quickstep showed up with a sprint team. They're there for Viviani.
Yeah, I was shocked by the amount of teams that decided not to send their top sprinters. I don't think these are necessarily like traditional sprint stages, but if you look at the profiles, there's a fair amount of flat days. So, the odds are on for him.
Yeah, I think that he's going to rack up quite a few stages.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I think that's about all we got. I do want to remind everybody, send us your coffee mug. It can appear on Ian and Friends. We'll be having multiple shows throughout the Giro d'Italia. And I guess we didn't mention that we are wearing pink for the Giro.
This is my Maglia Rosa.
Just wanted to connect the dots there so people didn't think that we just showed up in the same color shirt.
Although it's been known to happen.
All right. Well, we will see you guys on Friday for the start of the Giro d'Italia.
Get excited.
Cheers.
Bye.